There's a lot of talk about how the US government will be buying a million Bitcoin. They will be buying a significant amount of Bitcoin after Trump is inaugurated. I don't know if this is going to happen. I don't know if it's a possibility. But in this video, I want to talk about what happens to Bitcoin's price if the US government does announce that they want to buy a million Bitcoin. Let's get started. The most important concept that you really need to understand is that Bitcoin's price is determined at the margin. So let's say the US government wants to buy a million Bitcoin. This is how an order book would look. So this is just an example. Keep that in mind. I'm not trying to tell you that this is exactly what it looks like. This is just an example to illustrate the point that price is determined at the margin. What that means is you have a certain amount of Bitcoin at the current price, but if the US government wants to buy a million Bitcoin, some people may assume that they'll be able to buy all 1 million Bitcoin at $98,000 and it'll cost them something like $98 billion. But that's not how it works. The way that it really works is at every price, there's going to be a certain amount of Bitcoin available. So let's say at the current price, a lot of people are buying and selling Bitcoin. There are traders. They're willing to give away their Bitcoin at the current price. So let's say there are 1,000 Bitcoin available to be sold or available to be bought at the current price. But then there are also 1,000 buyers of Bitcoin at the current price. The current price is the equilibrium. That's where the market agrees that the price should be. So the most buyers will be at the current price. What would happen is if those 1,000 Bitcoin are sold, the price of Bitcoin has to go up, because if the number of sellers at the current price run out, to bring more sellers to the market, you have to offer more dollars. Let's say the number of Bitcoin at the current price runs out, you have to go to 98,100. Of course, in the case of Bitcoin, it's not going to work this way. It's not going to jump by $100. It'll probably jump by pennies. Maybe it'll go to 98,001 cent, 98,005 cent, 98,010 cent, depending on how liquid Bitcoin's market is at the time, depending on how many trades are being done. Keep in mind that most of the volume will be around the current price and it'll be around psychological levels. So 98,000 runs out. We'll just put this back just because I want to show you the calculations later. 98,000 runs out. You go to 98,100, 200, 300, 400, and so on. And as you approach 100,000, more and more Bitcoin are available to be bought. So people are willing to sell their Bitcoin as the price gets closer. They want to front run that $100,000 level. So let's say at 99,600, more Bitcoin enters the market. Instead of only 20 Bitcoin being available, 99,600, there's 80 Bitcoin available. Then at 99,700, as you get closer, the amount of Bitcoin available goes up. So 99,700, another 100 Bitcoin, 99,800, another 150, then 99,900, another 500 Bitcoin. And then at 100,000, you have a massive amount of Bitcoin that's available. 1,000 Bitcoin, just for the purposes of this, 1,000 Bitcoin is available at $100,000. So from the current price all the way to $100,000, there are only 3,370 Bitcoin available. Let me zoom in here. 3,370 Bitcoin available. If the US government wants to buy all 1 million Bitcoin all at once, it'll probably end up paying a lot more than the current price, because as the price moves up, less and less Bitcoin is available. But let's say let me give you an example here. So if we go to 100,000, after 100,000, maybe there's only 200 Bitcoin available at 101, then 100 at 102, because these aren't psychological levels. 101, 102,000, they're just random numbers. At 110, maybe there's another spike in the amount of Bitcoin available. Then at 120, there's another spike in the amount of Bitcoin available. This is what Bitcoin's price is determined at the margin means. The price is determined based on how much Bitcoin is available to be bought. At certain points, there's going to be nearly no Bitcoin available to be bought. So let's say, for example, at 133,000, that's a completely random number. I don't know, maybe people think of it as something that they want to sell their Bitcoin at, but $133,492, there's going to be a small amount of Bitcoin available at that price, but at 150,000, there's going to be a lot more because it's another psychological level. 125,000, maybe there's going to be more. I haven't included that there, but let's say it goes based on these numbers. If the US government wants to buy, based on my model here, based on what I've showed you here, not model, but based on the order book that I've created here, the US government would be able to buy 39,330 Bitcoin at the market if they just wanted to put through a market order. And the price would jump up to $300,000 because the amount of Bitcoin available at every single price eventually runs out. The people who are willing to sell their Bitcoin at that price, at that current price, eventually they'll run out because more and more Bitcoin goes into the hands of people who are never willing to sell again. And I think this is a really important concept to understand because it shows you that the price isn't going to move linearly. So if we take a look at Bitcoin's chart, I think it shows what I was trying to explain to you pretty well. If we zoom out, we can see that there are periods of time where Bitcoin's price just skyrockets because in those periods, there's no Bitcoin available to be bought. So let's say, for example, you have a period here where Bitcoin's price bottoms. Before this, Bitcoin was just moving sideways. The price was just going from 23,000 all the way to 16,000. So between these levels, Bitcoin's price was just going up, coming down, going up, coming down. And eventually, at some point, maybe institutional investors started figuring it out. Maybe some kind of massive investor, some kind of retail investor, whoever it could be, maybe they started figuring it out and maybe they got some insider knowledge. For example, that maybe there's a Bitcoin ETF coming up. And what happens is whoever starts buying first buys at the lows. And then as the price moves up, more and more of the market starts participating and they start wanting to buy Bitcoin as well. So what they do is they buy everything that's available and they put it away and they don't sell it again. But then the people who have Bitcoin and are willing to sell at these prices eventually run out. So what happens is, let's say there's only 1,000 Bitcoin available to be bought. Those 1,000 Bitcoin are bought and the price has to move up. So because Bitcoin runs out at every price, we see these violent moves up. Because if there's no Bitcoin available to be bought, then buyers have to bring more sellers to the market by offering them more US dollars. So we see here in February 2024, Bitcoin's price went from $42,426 all the way up to $63,986. This was one of the biggest moves in a month at the time. And then we had a more recent move, very similar. We saw in November of 2024, Bitcoin's price went from 66,000 all the way up to almost $100,000. Then it came back down. Then it moved all the way back up to $110,000. And the reason why this happens is because in between these two prices, there are probably very few sellers willing to give away their Bitcoin. Because why would they want to give it away at $76,400 or $84,300? And this is actually one of the reasons why we didn't really stay in the $80,000 level for a very long time. The $80,000 level is basically just a speed bump on the way to 100,000. 90,000 is a little bit more of a challenge because, of course, like I said, people want to front run the $100,000 level. So they're willing to give away their Bitcoin. They think that if Bitcoin is rejected at $100,000, it's going to come all the way back down to $15,000, $20,000, $10,000. So they're willing to give away their Bitcoin right under $100,000 because they don't quite think that Bitcoin is going to go any higher. So what they do is they sell their Bitcoin here. We have some selling pressure. Bitcoin's price moves sideways. There are a lot of buyers, of course, but there aren't that many sellers. Eventually, like I said, the sellers will run out. We saw Bitcoin's price move basically sideways in all of December. Even though December is supposed to be a really great month, we saw it go from 91,000 to 108,000 and then all the way back down to about 93,000 here. These periods here of just sideways movement is called consolidation. What it does is it wipes out anybody who's weak-handed. They don't quite understand what Bitcoin is, so they sell. They think that Bitcoin's price is going to go a lot lower. For example, here we saw Germany selling their Bitcoin. We saw Germany give away 50,000 Bitcoin for $2.5 billion. Now, the same Bitcoin is worth almost $5 billion. So at some point, the people who have Bitcoin will run out. Right now, we're trying to get through the $90,000 level, and it's very possible that if Bitcoin does get past $100,000, we may never come back to $100,000 again because of these consolidations. So I think that's something that could happen here. So we saw Bitcoin's price go from $70,000 to $50,000, and it kept going up, coming down, going up, coming down, going up, coming down. And this happened for 8 whole months. The reason for this is because people had a psychological barrier at the $70,000 level. This is where Bitcoin's price topped in the last cycle. So people were probably thinking, if Bitcoin's price gets to this level, I'm going to sell. I'm going to give away all the Bitcoin that I have because I don't want to go through the cycle again. I don't want to go through seeing my Bitcoin go back down to $15,000. But of course, they were wrong. So they gave away all of their Bitcoin here. They found buyers for their Bitcoin. The lowest price that somebody was willing to sell their Bitcoin for was here, around $50,000. I think this was supposed to be Germany. But eventually, after all these sellers ran out, the price starts skyrocketing again. So let's go back to this order book that I created. What would happen is from $98,000 to $100,000, maybe there's going to be not that much sell pressure. Maybe at 101, 102, 103,000, there's going to be a lot of sell pressure. Bitcoin's price maxed out at about $108,000 last time. Maybe there's going to be some sell pressure there. But after we pass this $110,000, $120,000, $130,000 level, we're going to see Bitcoin's price skyrocket. So if the US government announces that they want to buy 1 million Bitcoin, the amount of demand that's going to come into the market is going to be massive. But also keep in mind that this can go the other way as well. Let's say the US government says, we're not going to start a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What's going to happen is there's probably not going to be as many buyers for Bitcoin as expected. The people who want to buy Bitcoin because they think that the US government is going to start a strategic Bitcoin reserve may actually exit the market. They may start thinking, oh, this is not worth holding. The US government doesn't want it, so why would I want it? Maybe they'll sell their Bitcoin. But again, the people who think of it that way, the people who think that the US government is necessary for Bitcoin's price to go much, much higher, and they don't want to buy Bitcoin unless the US government owns it, are going to run out. Eventually, they're going to not have any impact on the market because they're not going to have any Bitcoin to sell into the market. So this goes right back to the principle that Bitcoin's price runs out at every single price. So if Bitcoin starts dropping, let's say it goes down to 50,000, 40,000, 30,000, maybe at $30,000, nobody else is willing to sell. Maybe all the sellers run out at 30,000, all of the sellers sell at 30,000 and starts climbing again. I don't personally think that the price will drop back down to $30,000 again because of this consolidation here. So I think that maybe we drop back down to 70,000 at most because all of the sellers at 70,000 ran out. And we can see that from this consolidation right here. On this chart here, we can compare Bitcoin's current cycle to the previous cycle. So we can see here from 2014, 2018, 2022, we can see that Bitcoin is pretty much in line with all of its previous cycles. So maybe, for all we know, in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, we start seeing Bitcoin's price really ripping to the upside and breaking a lot of the expectations that we have for Bitcoin's maximum price. Maybe it goes to 150, 200, $300,000. I don't know where it'll go by the end of this cycle, but eventually we'll hit a psychological level where people are willing to sell their Bitcoin again. Because Bitcoin's price is determined at the margin, what happens is fear and greed play a huge role in the price of Bitcoin in the future. So let's say, for example, we have tons of people who bought Bitcoin here. Maybe they used leverage. Maybe they got overconfident around the $70,000 level in the last cycle, and then the price starts dropping a little bit. What they do is because they used leverage and they see all of their life savings just pretty much disappearing, they start selling. And then other people start selling. And then other people are forced to sell because they used leverage and maybe they got force liquidated. So what happens is at some point, the sellers run out. This is the cycle that Bitcoin's price is probably going to follow for a very long time. We're going to see that at some point, Bitcoin's price starts dropping, and it starts dropping even harder because people who hold Bitcoin are fearful and they're scared that Bitcoin's price is going to zero, so they sell everything. The people who buy Bitcoin with leverage want to sell because they don't want to hold on to this useless asset and have a ton of debt. They don't quite understand what it is. So what they do is they give away their Bitcoin at the lowest prices. So here is where we saw the most fear, right here at $15,000. This is where Bitcoin had the most sellers because they were thinking that Bitcoin's price is going to go to zero. So just to connect the dots here, Bitcoin's price bottoms when all of the sellers run out. Bitcoin price tops when all of the buyers run out. What's going to happen with the US government, though, is that the buyers are never going to run out. The US government is going to be willing to buy Bitcoin no matter what because they can borrow money into existence. When the US government does finally announce that it's going to start up a strategic Bitcoin reserve or that it wants to own 1 million Bitcoin, I think what this is going to do is it's going to trigger a lot more buyers to come to the market. And what this might do is it may stop people from wanting to sell their Bitcoin for dollars, because anybody who understands how Bitcoin works understands that it can't be created out of thin air, while the US dollar can be created out of thin air. The US government can borrow dollars into existence, and it can give those dollars away to get this asset that nobody else can create more of. One of the reasons why huge players buy small amounts of Bitcoin over time is because they know that if they were to put through a massive market order, they're going to push the price up and they're going to basically lose money on that order. So what they're going to do is, let's say, for example, we have in this order book, we have 40,000 Bitcoin. If the US government goes and does a smash buy of 1 million Bitcoin, what they're going to do is they're going to push the price up and they're going to basically devalue their dollar massively in a very short time, because immediately, if they wanted to buy all their 1 million Bitcoin today, they may not be able to find that liquidity. This is part of the reason why a lot of institutional investors use OTC exchanges, over the counter exchanges, to make their trades. So let's say, for example, MicroStrategy bought something like 55,000 Bitcoin all at once. And what they did was they used an OTC exchange, an OTC desk, to facilitate that transaction. If they had bought on the market, they would have pumped Bitcoin's price up massively. Let's say they went on Coinbase and they started putting market orders to buy as much Bitcoin as they can at any price. They would have probably pumped the price up to $150,000, $200,000, $300,000. Institutional investors do this to avoid something called slippage. So let's say, for example, if somebody wanted 2,000 Bitcoin, what they could do is they could take all of the Bitcoin available at the current price, and then they could bump the price up. How much would it cost them to buy 2,000 Bitcoin? So let's say, for example, if they were to buy at market, to buy 2,000 Bitcoin, it would bump the price up from 98,000 all the way to $99,900. But let's say instead of buying all 2,000 Bitcoin all at once, they buy 100 Bitcoin a day. What's going to happen is the price is going to stay around this price, around this level here, because retail investors who own Bitcoin are going to be willing to sell. They're going to get more and more impatient. They're going to sell their Bitcoin because they think this is going nowhere. So over the next 10, 20, 30 days, maybe they're willing to sell more of their Bitcoin at the market price. Instead of doing these market orders for $5 billion, what these institutional investors will do is they'll buy $100 million a day, $50 million, $20 million a day. They'll take whatever they can out of the market. They'll keep retail investors thinking that the price is just moving sideways. Retail investors get frustrated, and then they sell everything that they have. So when the US government does say that it's going to buy 1 million Bitcoin or 100,000 Bitcoin, whatever it's going to buy, what we're going to see is a lot of other countries are going to start doing the exact same thing. The thing about Bitcoin is that once the supply runs out, you can't create any more. So let's say the US government says they want to buy 1 million Bitcoin. Now China has an incentive to buy 1 million Bitcoin. Now Russia has an incentive to buy 1 million Bitcoin. Now India, now Brazil, all of these different countries have an incentive to accumulate as much Bitcoin as they can to maintain the power structure of the current financial system. So if the US government triggers something by saying that they're going to buy 1 million Bitcoin, they may just completely break the market, because let's say China comes in and they say, we're going to buy every single Bitcoin that's available on every single exchange around the world, and we're going to take it into our own custody. So now what the US government has to do is it has to print even more money to buy even more Bitcoin. This is game theory in action. This is different countries trying to figure out what other countries are going to do and then taking the steps to put themselves ahead of everyone else. So I don't know if the US government is going to announce a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I don't know if when Trump gets inaugurated, if he's going to say it within the first 100 days. I have no idea. But if the US government does say that it's going to start a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we could see the price skyrocket within days, because, like I said, Bitcoin runs out at every single price. The people who are willing to sell at $98,000 are going to run out of Bitcoin. The people who are willing to sell at 100,000 are going to run out of Bitcoin. People who are willing to sell at 110 are also going to run out of Bitcoin. the amount of Bitcoin available to be bought at each of these prices is going to decrease until there's none left. We're never going to go back to a $1 Bitcoin. We're never going to go back to a $10 Bitcoin, $100, $1,000 Bitcoin. We're never going to go back to those prices because demand so massively outpaces supply. Think about it this way. If Bitcoin's price drops to $1, anyone can go ahead and buy as much Bitcoin as they can for $1. But at the same time, the number of people who are willing to sell their Bitcoin for $1 will run out. If somebody has $5,000 and Bitcoin's price drops to $1, they can now buy 5,000 Bitcoin. While if the price were to go higher and higher and higher, they'll be able to buy less and less Bitcoin. At the $100,000 level, they'll only be able to buy 5% of a Bitcoin for $5,000. So when the price drops, the purchasing power of people who are sitting on the sidelines with US dollars increases and they're willing to buy. So whenever the US government does say that it wants to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible, we're going to see the price skyrocket and then it's never going to come back down again.